The night I spent $2 from panhandling on that lottery ticket changed everything, but not in the way you'd expect. I didn't win millions. I won exactly $1,000, just enough to buy the condemned Jenkins farmstead on the outskirts of Millfield, Indiana. What I discovered beneath that crumbling property didn't just save my life. It exposed a military conspiracy that had been buried for 50 years, bringing 4-star generals to my doorstep within 24 hours, desperate to keep their secrets hidden. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, when I was just another invisible veteran sleeping under highway overpasses, with no idea that a forgotten Cold War bunker would soon make me the most wanted man in America. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you that I couldn't share anywhere else. My name is Marcus Cooper, though most people who knew me before called me Mac. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne, came home with a Purple Heart, severe PTSD, and a back injury that made keeping a steady job nearly impossible. The VA system failed me like it failed so many others. Within 3 years of my honorable discharge, I'd lost my apartment, my marriage, and most of my dignity. By the winter of 2023, I was living rough on the streets of Indianapolis, just another statistic in America's veteran homelessness crisis. The lottery ticket was stupid, I know. When you're counting every penny for your next meal, spending $2 on a scratch-off seems irresponsible. But it was Veterans Day. I was feeling particularly low, and the convenience store clerk, himself a Vietnam vet, had slipped me a free coffee. Sometimes when you've lost all hope, you do irrational things just to feel like you still have agency in your life. I scratched that ticket sitting on a bench outside the Indianapolis VA hospital, where I'd just been told there was a 6-month wait for mental health services. My hands were shaking from the cold November wind when I revealed 3 matching symbols. $1,000. Not life-changing money for most people, but for someone who'd been sleeping in cardboard boxes, it felt like a fortune. Most homeless individuals would have used that money for a cheap motel room, new clothes, maybe a bus ticket to somewhere warmer. But I'd heard through the Homeless Veterans Network about an opportunity in Millfield, a small town about 90 miles south. The Veterans Assistance Network, a non-profit that helps homeless vets, had partnered with the county to sell condemned properties to veterans for next to nothing, with the agreement that we'd fix them up and live in them. The Jenkins farmstead was the last property on their list, and nobody wanted it. The main house had been destroyed in a fire 15 years earlier, leaving only the stone foundation. The barn had collapsed during a storm, and the remaining outbuildings were beyond repair. 20 acres of overgrown farmland surrounded by woods, with no running water or electricity. The county assessor had valued it at $800 just to get it off their books. With the remaining $200, I bought a tent, some basic tools, and enough canned food to last a month. Eleanor May Jenkins had died without heirs 18 months earlier at the age of 93. According to the locals at Millfield's Only and Diner, she'd lived alone on that farm for the last 40 years after her husband passed. She'd been something of a town fixture, known for her peace garden and her strange obsession with local military history. The waitress, Maria Santos, told me Eleanor had always claimed the property had special significance, dating back to World War II, though nobody took her seriously. I arrived at the property on a grey December morning, my few possessions loaded, into a rusty pickup truck I'd bought for $100 from a sympathetic farmer. The Veterans Assistance Network had given me the deed and the keys to a padlock on the gate, though there wasn't much left to lock up. As I drove down the overgrown driveway, I wondered if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. The property was worse than the photos suggested. Where the barn once stood, Only broken beams and rotted boards remained scattered across frozen mud. The house's stone foundation was filled with charred debris and years of accumulated leaves. The only structure still partially standing was what looked like an old storm cellar built into a small hill, its heavy wooden doors hanging askew on rusted hinges. I spent my first week clearing a spot for my tent near the old foundation, close enough to the road that I could walk to town when needed. The work was hard on my injured back, but there was something therapeutic about having a purpose again. Each day, I'd clear a little more debris, sort through what could be salvaged, and try to imagine rebuilding something livable on this forgotten piece of land. It was during my second week, while exploring the storm cellar, that I made the first discovery. The cellar itself was unremarkable. Field stone walls, packed earth floor, wooden shelves that had long since rotted away. But as I was sweeping out decades of debris, my broom hit something metallic beneath a layer of decomposed leaves. Clearing away the organic matter revealed a steel plate set into the floor, about 3 feet square, with no visible handle or opening mechanism. The plate was clearly not part of the original storm cellar construction. It had been expertly installed, fitted so precisely that it would have been invisible if not for the years of accumulated debris I'd just cleared. Running my fingers along its edges, I could feel a slight gap, suggesting it could be opened, but I couldn't figure out how. I spent hours examining that metal plate, looking for hidden catches or release mechanisms. Military training had taught me to be observant, to notice details others might miss. There had to be a way to open it. As darkness fell, I reluctantly returned to my tent, but my mind kept circling back to that mysterious steel barrier. What would someone hide beneath a storm cellar floor? Why go to such lengths to conceal it? The next morning brought the first snow of the season, light flurries that dusted the ground and made the debris-filled foundation look almost picturesque. I returned to the storm cellar with better tools, a crowbar, hammer and flashlight I'd bought in town with some of the emergency fund the Veterans Assistance Network had provided. If there wasn't a proper opening mechanism, maybe I could pry the plate loose. But as I knelt beside the steel plate, something caught my eye. In the corner of the cellar, partially hidden behind a collapsed shelf, was an old metal toolbox. Unlike everything else in the cellar, it had been protected from the elements, showing only surface rust. Inside, I found tools that seemed oddly specific. A magnetic bar, several Allen wrenches of unusual sizes, and what looked like a modified tire iron with a peculiar hexagonal head. Returning to the steel plate, I noticed what I'd missed before. Tiny, hexagonal indentations at each corner, so small they looked like manufacturing marks. The modified tire iron fit perfectly. As I turned it in the first indentation, I heard a soft click. Moving to each corner in sequence, I repeated the process. With the fourth click, the plate shifted slightly, revealing a hidden hinge along an edge. The steel plate was heavier than expected, requiring all my strength to lift. Beneath it, a ladder descended into darkness. My flashlight beam revealed a vertical shaft, concrete-lined, extending down at least 15 feet. The ladder rungs were steel, showing minimal corrosion, suggesting this space had been sealed and protected from moisture. Every instinct told me to be cautious. Hidden underground spaces could be dangerous, unstable, filled with toxic gases, or structurally compromised, but curiosity overrode caution. I'd spent months living in uncertainty, scraping by day to day. This mystery, whatever it was, felt like the first interesting thing to happen to me in years. I tested the first rung carefully. It held firm. Slowly I descended into the shaft, my flashlight clenched between my teeth. The air grew cooler as I went down, but it didn't have the musty, stale quality I expected. There was ventilation somewhere, keeping the air relatively fresh. At the bottom, I found myself in a small antechamber, roughly 10 feet square, with concrete walls and a steel door set into the far wall. The door had no handle, just a numerical keypad that looked surprisingly modern. Above it, a small placard read, "Facility 7 Alpha, authorized personnel only, Project Harbinger." My military experience told me this was government construction, but nothing about it made sense. What was a classified facility doing beneath a private farm in rural Indiana? The keypad was electronic, which meant there had to be a power source. Looking around, I spotted a small electrical panel on the wall. Opening it revealed modern circuitry and a battery backup system that was still functioning, its LED indicator showing a charge. I tried a few obvious combinations on the keypad, 1234, 00, 1776, but nothing worked. Frustrated, I began examining the antechamber more carefully. In one corner, I found a small metal box welded to the wall. Inside was a laminated card with a series of numbers and a date, 11/22/1963. The numbers meant nothing to me, but the date was familiar to anyone who knew American history, the day President Kennedy was assassinated. On a hunch, I entered the date into the keypad, 11/22/63. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A soft beep, and the steel door's magnetic lock disengaged with a click. My heart was pounding as I pulled the door open, revealing a corridor that extended into darkness. Motion sensors activated overhead lighting as I stepped forward, fluorescent fixtures flickering to life after decades of dormancy. The corridor stretched for about 50 feet, ending at another door. Along the walls were framed photographs and documents, protected behind glass. The photos showed military personnel in 1960s-era uniforms, standing beside what looked like early computer equipment. One photo particularly caught my attention. A group of officers shaking hands with civilians in suits, an American flag prominent. In the background, the caption read, "Project Harbinger Senior Staff, July 1962. Among the faces in the photograph, I recognized one immediately from history books, General Curtis LeMay, the controversial Air Force Chief of Staff during the Cold War. But what shocked me was another face in the photo, much younger but unmistakable, Harrison Blackwell, now a four-star general and current deputy director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. The documents on display were partially redacted, but what remained visible painted a disturbing picture. Project Harbinger appeared to be a Cold War-era program involving psychological operations, civilian population studies, and something called cognitive warfare protocols. One document mentioned Field Testing Site 7 Alpha, Indiana Agricultural Zone. I photographed everything with my phone, though I had no signal this deep underground. Whatever this place was, it had been secret for a reason, and people like General Blackwell had apparently been involved from the beginning. The implications made my hands shake as I approached the final door. This door opened with a simple push bar, no lock or keypad. Beyond it lay the main facility, a large underground complex that took my breath away. The space was enormous, easily the size of a basketball court, with a 20-foot ceiling supported by concrete pillars. Banks of vintage computer equipment lined one wall, reel-to-reel tape drives and early mainframes that looked like museum pieces. Filing cabinets stretched along another wall, and in the center of the room sat a conference table surrounded by chairs, as if the occupants had simply stepped out and never returned. But it was the far wall that made my blood run cold. A massive map of the United States covered the entire surface, marked with hundreds of red pins. Each pin had a small tag attached. Moving closer, I read the tags. Population Control Test 1A, Media Manipulation Trial 3C, Civil Unrest Induction Point 7B. The pins were clustered around major cities but also dotted rural areas. Millfield, Indiana, had its own pin. Agricultural Community Behavioral Study 4D. Beside the map, a chalkboard still bore notes from what must have been the last meeting held here. The date at the top was November 15th, 1963, just a week before Kennedy's assassination. The notes referenced termination protocols, evidence, disposal, and Operation Cleanup. One line stood out: Presidential Directive Change Imminent. Accelerate all programs. I sank into one of the conference chairs, overwhelmed by what I was seeing. This wasn't just a Cold War-era bunker. It was a command center for some kind of massive psychological operation conducted on American citizens. And based on the documents I'd photographed in the corridor, General Blackwell had been part of it from the very beginning, which meant he was now in his 80s, but still in a position of power at the Pentagon. My phone suddenly vibrated in my pocket, impossible, since I had no signal. Pulling it out, I saw a message on the screen that made my heart stop. Unauthorized access detected. Facility 7 Alpha breach. Response team dispatched. ETA 30 minutes. The message vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by my normal lock screen. But the implication was clear. Somehow my entry into this facility had triggered an alert, and someone was coming. I had less than half an hour to document what I could and get out. I ran to the filing cabinets, pulling open drawers at random. Most contained routine administrative documents, but one drawer was different. Inside were files marked classified, special access required. The first file I opened contained photographs that made me sick to my stomach. American citizens, being subjected to various psychological experiments, some in laboratory settings, others unknowingly in their daily lives. Millfield residents were featured prominently, including photos of the town square, the local school, and even the diner where I'd eaten just days before. Another file detailed Operation Mindbridge, a program designed to test methods of mass, behavioral control through media manipulation, chemical dispersal, and electromagnetic frequencies. The clinical language couldn't disguise the horrific reality. The US government had been experimenting on its own citizens, using small towns like Millfield as unwitting laboratories. I grabbed as many files as I could carry, stuffing them into a canvas bag I found on a shelf. My military training kicked in. Document everything, secure evidence, prepare for extraction. But as I worked, a terrible realization settled over me. If General Blackwell was still involved with this program, if it had continued in some form beyond the 1960s, then my discovery put me in immediate danger. A sound echoed through the facility, the distant clang of the exterior hatch being opened. They were here, earlier than the message had indicated. My mind raced through options. There might be another exit. Emergency protocols would have demanded it. I scanned the main room desperately, looking for any sign of an alternate route. In the far corner, partially hidden behind equipment racks, I spotted an emergency exit sign, its red letters faded but still visible. I ran toward it, the canvas bag of documents bouncing against my hip. The exit door was locked, but a fire axe hung on the wall beside it. I grabbed it and smashed the lock mechanism, military efficiency overriding any concern about property damage. The door opened into a narrow tunnel that angled upward. Emergency lighting flickered on as I entered, revealing a passage that seemed to stretch forever. Behind me, I could hear voices in the main facility, deep, authoritative commands being issued. They'd discovered I was here. I ran through the tunnel, my injured back screaming in protest. The passage seemed to go on forever, turning and twisting as it gradually ascended. Finally, after what felt like miles but was probably only a few 100 yards, I reached another ladder leading up to a hatch. The mechanism was stiff with age, but desperation gave me strength. The hatch opened with a rusty shriek, and I emerged into the snowy woods about a quarter-mile from the farmstead. Through the bare trees, I could see vehicles converging on the property, black SUVs with government plates, a military-style truck, and local police cruisers. They weren't being subtle. Whatever was in those files I carried, whatever secrets Project Harbinger held, they were important enough to mobilize significant resources to retrieve. I ran deeper into the woods, my combat experience guiding me through the underbrush. I needed to get these documents somewhere safe, to someone who could expose the truth. But first, I had to survive the next few hours. Behind me, I heard the distant barking of dogs. They'd brought trackers. As I ran through the Indiana forest, classified documents clutched to my chest, I thought about Eleanor May Jenkins and her peace garden. She must have known about the bunker beneath her property. Had she been a guardian of these secrets, or another unwitting victim of Project Harbinger? Either way, her death had set in motion events that were about to expose one of the darkest chapters in American history. But I was no longer just Marcus Cooper, homeless veteran. I was now the keeper of truths that powerful people had killed to protect. The hunters had become the hunted, and I had information that could bring down some of the most powerful figures in the US military establishment. The question was whether I could stay alive long enough to reveal it to the world. As the sound of pursuit grew closer, I made a decision that would change everything. I wouldn't just run, I wouldn't just hide. I would fight back the only way I knew how, by making sure these secrets saw the light of day, no matter the cost. My country had experimented on its own citizens, and General Harrison Blackwell had been there from the beginning. It was time for the truth to finally be told. The dogs were getting closer. I could hear their baying echoing through the bare winter trees as I stumbled through the undergrowth, the canvas bag of classified documents banging against my hip with each desperate stride. Snow had begun falling more heavily, which might help cover my tracks, but would also make the terrain more treacherous. My combat boots, worn thin from months of homeless wandering, provided little traction on the icy ground. I'd been running for nearly an hour, using every evasion technique I'd learned in Afghanistan, doubling back, walking in stream beds, creating false trails. But this wasn't the mountains of Kandahar, and these weren't Taliban fighters pursuing me. These were professional trackers with modern equipment, and they had the advantage of knowing the terrain better than I did. The woods ended abruptly at a chain-link fence, marking the boundary of the old Fort Henley military reservation. The base had been decommissioned in the early 1970s, but the perimeter fencing remained, topped with rusted barbed wire. Through the fence, I could see abandoned barracks and administrative buildings, their windows dark and empty. If I could get inside the reservation, the buildings might provide temporary shelter and a place to hide the documents. I used the fire axe I'd carried from the bunker to cut through the fence, wincing at the metallic sound that seemed to echo through the forest. Once through, I sprinted across an open field toward the nearest structure, a two-story brick building that had probably once housed officers. The door was locked, but the axe made quick work of it. Inside, the building was a time capsule from the Nixon era. Desks still held rotary phones and manual typewriters. Calendars on the walls showed December 1971. Dust particles danced in the weak winter light, filtering through grimy windows. I chose a windowless interior office on the second floor, barricading the door with a heavy metal desk. For the first time since fleeing the bunker, I had a moment to catch my breath and examine what I'd grabbed. The canvas bag contained 8 manila folders, each marked with classification stamps and project codes. As I spread them across the dusty floor, the full scope of Project Harbinger began to emerge. The first folder contained what appeared to be the project's founding documents from 1961. The stated goal was chilling in its clinical language: to develop and test methodologies for influencing civilian behavior patterns in support of national security objectives. What followed were detailed proposals for experiments ranging from subliminal messaging in television broadcasts to introducing psychoactive compounds into municipal water supplies. But it was the second folder that made my hands shake. It contained a list of test communities across America, complete with population data and experimental protocols. Millfield, Indiana was listed as Site 7 Alpha, designated for agricultural community cohesion studies. The experiments conducted there involved everything from manipulating local news coverage to testing social discord induction techniques designed to create conflict between longtime neighbors. One document, dated March 1963, described an experiment where researchers had introduced false rumors about communist sympathizers in Millfield, then documented how quickly the community turned suspicious and paranoid. Another detailed the use of low-frequency radio waves to induce anxiety and sleeplessness in targeted households. The clinical notes described families turning against each other, friendships destroyed, and a general breakdown of the town's social fabric, all carefully orchestrated and monitored from the underground facility. I photographed every page with my phone, knowing the battery wouldn't last forever. Outside, I could hear vehicles approaching the base perimeter. They'd tracked me this far, and it was only a matter of time before they started searching the buildings. The third folder contained correspondence between Project Harbinger leadership and various government officials. Most names were redacted, but one signature appeared repeatedly: Major Harrison Blackwell, Project Coordinator. In one memo dated November 1963, Blackwell wrote about the need to accelerate termination protocols due to impending administrative changes at the highest levels. The timing, just days before Kennedy's assassination, seemed more than coincidental. A photograph fell from the folder, a group of men in a wood-paneled office, drinks in hand, celebrating something. The caption on the back read, "Harbinger, Senior Staff, Project Success Celebration, November 30th, 1963. There was Blackwell, young and smiling, toasting with other men whose faces had been methodically scratched out, all except one, a civilian in an expensive suit, whom I recognized from history books as Alan Dulles, former CIA director who had been fired by Kennedy in 1961. The sound of breaking glass from somewhere below snapped me back to the present. They were in the building. I quickly stuffed the documents back into the bag and looked for another exit. An old fire escape clung to the building's exterior wall, accessible through a window at the end of the hallway. I eased open the office door, listening for footsteps. Voices echoed from the stairwell, at least 3 people moving methodically through the first floor. I crept down the hallway to the window, using the axe to break the painted-shut lock. The fire escape groaned under my weight, rust flaking off the metal railings as I descended. From my elevated position, I could see the full scope of the search operation. Military vehicles surrounded the abandoned base, and soldiers in tactical gear were setting up a perimeter. This wasn't a simple law enforcement operation. This was a military containment exercise. Whatever secrets Project Harbinger held, they were important enough to mobilize active duty troops on American soil. I reached the ground and ran toward a motor pool area where several abandoned military vehicles sat in various states of decay. Most were stripped shells, but one, an old M35 cargo truck, looked relatively intact. The keys, miraculously, were still in the ignition, a common practice on secure military bases where theft wasn't a concern. The engine turned over on the 3rd try, coughing to life with a cloud of black smoke. The fuel gauge showed a quarter tank. Not much, but maybe enough to reach the nearest town. I threw the truck into gear just as shouts erupted behind me. In the rearview mirror, I saw soldiers raising their weapons. The first shot spiderwebbed the rear window as I accelerated through the motor pool gate, smashing through the chain-link fence onto a service road. The old truck handled like a wounded elephant, but its military construction made it sturdy enough to plow through obstacles that would have stopped a civilian vehicle. I had a brief head start, but it wouldn't last long. They had modern vehicles, communications, and air support if needed. I had a 40-year-old truck running on fumes and a bag of documents that could destroy careers and rewrite history. The odds weren't in my favor, but I'd faced worse in Afghanistan. The service road connected to State Highway 42 about 2 miles from the base. As I approached the intersection, I saw they'd already set up a roadblock, 2 police cruisers angled. Across the highway, officers crouched behind them with weapons drawn. I was trapped. Or was I? The M35 was built for off-road combat. I yanked the wheel hard left, sending the truck careening down the steep embankment beside the highway. The vehicle bucked and lurched over the rough terrain, crashing through saplings and underbrush. Behind me, I heard sirens and more gunfire, but the trees provided cover. I emerged onto a farm access road, mud and snow spraying from the wheels. According to the faded road signs, I was heading toward Corridon, a small town about 15 miles south. If I could reach it, maybe I could find help, or at least a place to hide the documents before they caught me. The truck's engine began, making unhealthy noises, and steam started rising from under the hood. I'd pushed it too hard. About 3 miles from Corridon, the engine seized completely, leaving me stranded on a lonely country road as snow continued to fall. I grabbed the document bag and abandoned the truck, heading into a cornfield where the harvested stalks provided minimal cover. In the distance, I could hear helicopters. They'd called in air support. The net was closing. That's when I saw the grain silo rising above the fields about half a mile away, part of a small farm operation. If I could reach it, the metal structure might provide cover from thermal imaging that the helicopters were probably using. I ran through the corn stubble, my lungs burning in the cold air. The farm appeared deserted, which made sense. It was Sunday afternoon, and most farmers would be inside watching football or at church. I climbed the access ladder on the outside of the silo, my fingers numb from the cold. At the top, a small platform provided access to the grain storage area. I crawled inside through the hatch, finding myself in a cylindrical metal space about 20 feet in diameter. The silo was empty except for remnants of last season's corn scattered on the floor. I sat with my back against the curved wall, clutching the document bag, trying to figure out my next move. The metal structure did seem to interfere with radio signals. My phone showed no reception at all. That's when I heard the vehicles arriving at the farm. Doors slammed, dogs barked, and voices shouted commands. They'd tracked me here. I peered through a small ventilation grate and saw at least a dozen personnel surrounding the silo, weapons drawn. A voice echoed through a bullhorn. "Marcus Cooper, this is General Harrison Blackwell. Yes, I came personally for this. You've stumbled into something you don't understand, son. Something that's bigger than both of us. Come down peacefully, and we can discuss this like reasonable men." The voice matched the young man in those photographs, though aged by 60 years. The fact that a 4-star general had come personally to a cornfield in Indiana told me everything about how seriously they took this threat. I shouted back through the ventilation grate, "I understand enough, General. I know about the experiments on American citizens. I know about Millfield and the other test sites. I know you've been covering this up since 1963. There was a pause before Blackwell responded. "You don't have the full picture, Cooper. Project Harbinger wasn't what those documents make it seem. We were protecting America from something far worse. Come down and I'll explain everything. Like you explained to the families in Millfield whose lives you destroyed, like you explained to all the test subjects who never knew they were part of your experiments." Another pause, longer this time. When Blackwell spoke again, his tone had changed. "You're a soldier, Cooper. You understand that sometimes we have to make hard choices for national security. What we did with Harbinger saved American lives. The Soviets had their own programs, mind control, behavioral modification, things that would have destroyed our society from within. We had to develop countermeasures. Countermeasures that you tested on innocent Americans. There are no innocent people in war, Cooper. You know that. And the Cold War was a war, just fought with different weapons. Every test subject, every experiment, every protocol we developed, it all served to protect our nation from external threats you can't imagine. I looked at the documents spread around me on the silo floor, page after page of clinical descriptions of American citizens being manipulated, their minds and behaviors altered without their knowledge or consent. Whatever justification Blackwell offered, it couldn't excuse this fundamental betrayal of trust. And what about after the Cold War ended, General? The dates on some of these documents go well into the 1990s. What external threat were you protecting us from then? Silence. Then the threats never ended, Cooper. They just changed form. Terrorism, cyber warfare, information manipulation, Project Harbinger evolved to meet new challenges. Even now, protocols we developed are protecting Americans from threats they don't even know exist. You mean it's still active? You're still experimenting on people? I've said too much already. This is your last chance, soldier. Come down peacefully, return the documents, and sign a national security agreement. In exchange, I can guarantee your safety and even help with your situation. The VA system failed you. I can fix that. Full disability benefits, proper medical care, maybe even a job with one of our contractors. You could have your life back. The offer was tempting. After months of homelessness, the promise of stability and support was almost overwhelming. But I thought about the faces in those photographs. Ordinary Americans who had become unwitting lab rats in their own country. I thought about Eleanor May Jenkins, spending 40 years guarding secrets on that farm, and about the current residents of Millfield who might still be subject to experiments they couldn't see or understand. I can't do that, General. The American people deserve to know the truth. The truth? Blackwell's voice turned hard. The truth is that sheep need shepherds, Cooper. The average American can't handle the complexities of national security. They want to sleep safely in their beds at night without knowing what it takes to keep them safe. We give them that gift. By violating everything this country stands for, by doing whatever is necessary. You've been in combat, Cooper. You've made hard choices. This is no different, but it was different. In Afghanistan, we fought an identified enemy who knew they were in combat. We didn't experiment on civilians or manipulate our own people's minds. There were lines we didn't cross, principles we upheld even in the midst of war. I'm going to expose this, General, all of it. No, son, you're not. His voice carried a tone of genuine regret. We can't allow that. You've forced our hand. I heard a hissing sound and noticed wisps of gas seeping through the ventilation grates. They were pumping something into the silo. I covered my nose and mouth with my shirt, but I could already feel the effects. Dizziness, blurred vision, a strange heaviness in my limbs. Through the growing fog in my mind, I managed one last act of defiance. I pulled out my phone and initiated an upload of all the photos I'd taken to a cloud service. The progress bar crept slowly across the screen, 10%, 20%, 30%, as the gas continued to fill the confined space. At 47%, my fingers went numb and the phone slipped from my grasp. As consciousness faded, my last coherent thought was a prayer that somehow, some way, the upload would complete, that the truth would escape, even if I couldn't. The world went black, and I surrendered to the darkness, not knowing if I would ever wake up again. The documents lay scattered around my unconscious form, secrets that had waited 60 years to be revealed now just inches from my limp fingers. Outside the silo, General Blackwell stood in the snow, his face grim as he watched his team prepare to retrieve both the documents and the problematic veteran who had stumbled upon them. But what neither of us knew in that moment was that Eleanor May Jenkins, in her 40 years of guarding the property, had prepared for this eventuality. She had created her own insurance policy, her own dead man's switch, and my discovery had set it in motion. The real battle for the truth about Project Harbinger was just beginning, and players neither Blackwell nor I knew existed were about to enter the game. I awoke in a sterile white room that smelled of industrial disinfectant and floor wax. My head felt like it had been stuffed with cotton, and my mouth tasted of copper and chemicals. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their harsh brightness making me squint as I tried to orient myself. I was lying on a medical gurney, wearing a hospital gown, with monitoring equipment quietly beeping beside me. The room had no windows, just smooth walls and a single door with a small reinforced glass panel. Military medical facility, my training, told me. Probably underground, based on the quality of the air, recycled, processed, artificial. My wrists and ankles were secured to the gurney with padded restraints. Professional work, designed to hold without causing injury. As my vision cleared, I noticed a camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling, its red light indicating it was active. They were watching me. Good. I turned my face toward the camera and spoke, my voice hoarse from whatever they'd used to knock me out. My name is Marcus Cooper, serial number 384-526-2891. I was honorably discharged from the United States Army, 2nd Airborne Division. I'm an American citizen being held against my will. I want a lawyer. The door opened almost immediately, and General Harrison Blackwell entered, followed by a woman in medical scrubs. He looked different than I'd imagined from his voice. Shorter, more compact, with silver hair and pale blue, eyes that held no warmth. Despite being in his 80s, he carried himself with military precision. "Good morning, Sergeant Cooper," he said, pulling up a metal chair beside my gurney. "Though technically it's evening, you've been unconscious for about 14 hours. Dr. Martinez here tells me you'll have a headache, but no permanent effects from the sedative." "Where am I? Where are the documents I found?" Blackwell's expression didn't change. "You're in a secure medical facility. The documents are safe. More importantly, you're safe. Despite what you might think, we're not your enemies here." "You gassed me in a grain silo. You're holding me against my will. That doesn't sound friendly to me." "We sedated you for your own protection. You were agitated, armed with a fire axe, and making threats about national security. Standard protocol demanded we contain the situation with minimal force." "Minimal force? You deployed military units on American soil. You're violating posse. Comitatus." Blackwell smiled thinly. "You know your law, but there are exceptions for matters of national security. Besides, those weren't active military, private contractors from Blackwater Defense, perfectly legal. Like Project Harbinger was legal, experimenting on American citizens without their consent." His smile faded. "You've read fragments of documents from 60 years ago taken out of context. You don't understand what you found. Then explain it to me. You said you would." Blackwell studied me for a moment, then nodded to Dr. Martinez. She checked my vitals, made some notes on a tablet, and left without speaking. When the door closed behind her, Blackwell leaned back in his chair. "What do you know about MK-Ultra, Sergeant?" The question surprised me. The CIA mind control program from the 50s and 60s, LSD experiments, psychological torture. It was exposed in the 70s during the Church Committee hearings. Correct. What most people don't know is that MK-Ultra was a deliberately flawed program designed to be discovered and take the fall for a dozen other classified projects. It was a lightning rod, meant to absorb public outrage while the real research continued elsewhere. Projects like Harbinger? Harbinger was different. It wasn't about creating Manchurian candidates or developing truth serums. It was about understanding mass psychology, how ideas spread through populations, how to strengthen or weaken social bonds. The Soviets had their own programs, far more aggressive than ours. We needed to understand these mechanisms to defend against them. By testing on unwitting Americans, or by studying natural social dynamics in controlled environments. Millfield wasn't chosen randomly. It was demographically perfect, isolated enough to limit variables, but large enough to show meaningful patterns. We didn't create the social tensions there. We simply documented and occasionally amplified what already existed. I read the files, General. You introduced false information, used electromagnetic frequencies to induce anxiety, manipulated local media. That's not observation, that's experimentation. Blackwell stood and began pacing, his hands clasped behind his back. Let me tell you a story, Sergeant. In 1962, we intercepted Soviet communications about something called Operation Bouquet. They were planning to introduce an engineered virus into several American cities, not to kill, but to alter brain chemistry, to make populations more susceptible to suggestion, more likely to embrace communist ideology. We had 6 months to develop countermeasures. He stopped at a wall-mounted display showing a map of the United States. Project Harbinger gave us the tools to identify and neutralize Soviet sleeper agents who were already in place, waiting to distribute the virus. We used what we learned in Millfield to develop detection protocols that saved thousands, maybe millions, of lives. The techniques we developed are still used today to identify terrorist cells and prevent attacks. And the people of Millfield, the families torn apart, the communities destroyed, they were just collateral damage. They were patriots even if they didn't know it. Their sacrifice protected our nation. That's a convenient rationalization. But what about after the Soviet threat ended? I saw documents from the 90s, even later. Who was the enemy then? Blackwell returned to his chair, suddenly looking his age. The enemy evolved: international terrorism, domestic extremism, cyber warfare, information manipulation. The battleground shifted from physical territory to human minds. Social media, fake news, viral marketing, these are all weapons now. Harbinger protocols help us understand and counter these threats. You're still running experiments? Still manipulating American citizens? We're protecting them. Every day, foreign actors attempt to influence American minds through sophisticated psychological operations. Without our countermeasures, without the understanding Harbinger gave us, our society would have fractured long ago. So you became what you fought against. You manipulate minds to prevent mind manipulation. We maintain stability. We preserve American values and social cohesion against forces that would tear us apart. Whose values? Who decides what thoughts are acceptable? You've appointed yourself thought police. Blackwell's jaw tightened. We don't control thoughts, we maintain balance. When extremist ideologies, left or right, threaten social stability, we provide counter-narratives. When foreign propaganda seeks to divide Americans, we reinforce unifying messages. It's subtle, careful work. It's tyranny dressed up as patriotism. It's survival. You've seen combat, Cooper. You know that idealism dies fast when faced with real threats. The world isn't black and white. Sometimes you have to work in the shadows to preserve the light. I tested the restraints again, knowing they wouldn't give. And what happens to me now? Do I become another experiment? Another casualty of your shadow war? That depends on you. The documents you found. We need to know if copies exist. Your phone was uploading data when we recovered you. We interrupted the transmission, but some files may have gotten through. We need to know where they went, who might have received them. And if I cooperate, you'll be relocated. New identity, new life, comfortable circumstances. We can even arrange for ongoing veterans' benefits, medical care, whatever you need. You'll sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, and this entire incident will be forgotten. And if I refuse? Blackwell's expression hardened. Then you'll remain our guest indefinitely. National security detention under the Patriot Act. No lawyers, no trials, no outside contact. You'll simply disappear, like others who've threatened critical programs. Others like Eleanor May Jenkins. For the first time I saw surprise flicker across his face. Mrs. Jenkins died of natural causes, heart failure at 93. Convenient timing, though, right after she'd spent 40 years living above your secret bunker. Was she another patriot who didn't know it, another guardian of your secrets? Eleanor Jenkins was a remarkable woman. Her husband had worked on the original Harbinger installation. After he died, she chose to stay and protect what she knew was important. We supported her from a distance, ensured her safety and comfort, until she became inconvenient, until she died peacefully in her sleep. Not everything is a conspiracy. Sergeant, in your world, General, how can anyone tell the difference? Before he could answer, an alarm began beeping somewhere in the facility. Blackwell frowned, pulling out a secure phone. He listened for a moment, his expression growing darker. What do you mean, multiple breaches? He said into the phone. That's impossible. The firewalls are... He stopped listening again. How many sites? Jesus Christ. Implement Protocol 7 immediately. He ended the call and stared at me with a mixture of anger and something that might have been respect. It seems your upload was more successful than we thought. Files from the Harbinger archive have appeared on servers in 12 countries simultaneously. WikiLeaks, media organizations, academic institutions. Someone was waiting for your signal. I don't know what you're talking about. I was just trying to back up evidence. No, this is coordinated, professional. Someone else knows about Harbinger, someone with resources and planning. He studied me intently. Who are you working with, Cooper? Who sent you to that farm? Nobody sent me. I bought the place with lottery winnings. Pure chance. There's no such thing as pure chance in our world. Someone orchestrated this. Someone who's been waiting for the right moment, the right person. He stood abruptly. We're moving you to a more secure location. This facility may be compromised. As if on cue, the lights flickered and the electronic lock on the door clicked open. Blackwell spun toward the sound, his hand moving instinctively toward a sidearm he wasn't carrying. Through the reinforced glass panel, I could see the corridor, beyond, empty, with emergency lighting casting red shadows on the walls. A voice came over the facility's intercom system, crackling with static. General Blackwell, this is Mockingbird. The nest is compromised. Initiate Exodus protocol. Blackwell's face went pale. That's impossible. Mockingbird was decommissioned. In 1975, the voice continued. Negative, General. Mockingbird evolved. We've been watching, waiting. The time for secrets has ended. The restraints on my gurney suddenly released with a soft click. I sat up slowly, rubbing my wrists, wondering if this was another test or manipulation. Blackwell backed toward the door, his composure finally cracking. Stay where you are, Cooper. This is a security breach. Protocol demands... The door swung fully open, revealing an empty corridor. The intercom crackled again. Sergeant Cooper, you have 2 minutes to reach the East Service Tunnel. Transportation awaits. General Blackwell, remain where you are. Containment teams are en route. I slid off the gurney, my legs shaky but functional. Blackwell stood between me and the door, his elderly frame still carrying military bearing. You don't understand what you're involved in, he said. Mockingbird was a CIA media manipulation program. If someone's using that code name, they're not your allies. They're another faction, another group with their own agenda. Maybe, but right now, they're offering me a way out. Listen to me, Cooper. There are forces at work here bigger than either of us. Harbinger was just one program, among many. If you expose this, you'll start a war between agencies, between factions within our own government. The collateral damage... will be the truth. Finally. I pushed past him into the corridor. He didn't try to stop me physically, perhaps knowing he couldn't. As I reached the doorway, he called out one last time. They killed Kennedy, you know. Not who you think, not the mob or the Cubans. It was a coalition of interests who believed his policies would weaken America's psychological warfare capabilities. Harbinger was part of it. The documents you found only show the surface. If you dig deeper, if you really expose this, you'll be painting a target on your back that will never fade. I paused, looking back at him. Then why tell me? Because maybe it's time. I'm 84 years old. I've spent my entire life keeping secrets, believing it was for the greater good. But now, watching it all unravel, maybe the truth needs its day, no matter the cost. The intercom buzzed again. 60 seconds, Sergeant Cooper. East Service, tunnel. I left Blackwell standing in the White Room and ran down the corridor, following exit signs toward the eastern section of the facility. The place was eerily quiet. No guards, no personnel, just the echo of my bare feet on polished floors. Whatever Mockingbird was, they had effectively neutralized security at this supposedly impregnable facility. The service tunnel was exactly where the signs indicated, a maintenance access point with a ladder leading up. As I climbed, I could hear commotion elsewhere in the facility, alarms, shouting, the sound of running boots. At the top of the ladder, I emerged into a parking garage. A black sedan idled nearby, its rear door open. I hesitated. Trading one mysterious captivity for another didn't seem wise. But staying meant certain detention, and I had no other options. I got in the car. The driver didn't turn around, keeping their face hidden. On the seat beside me was a duffel bag containing clothes, shoes, a wallet with cash and a new ID, and an encrypted phone. As we pulled out of the garage, I changed out of the hospital gown, grateful for the warmth of actual clothing. "Who are you?" I asked the driver. "A friend of Eleanor's," came the reply, a woman's voice, older, with a slight southern accent. She knew this day would come. She made preparations. Eleanor Jenkins, she was part of this, part of the resistance. Her husband didn't just work on the Harbinger installation, he was one of the original whistleblowers. They killed him for it, made it look like a farming accident. Eleanor spent the next 40 years documenting everything, building a network, waiting for the right moment. And I'm that moment. You're the catalyst, a credible witness with no agenda except survival. Your military record makes you believable. Your homelessness makes you sympathetic. Your discovery appears accidental. You're perfect. I'm being used. You're being given a choice. The documents are already spreading online. Major news outlets have copies. Congressional staffers are reading them as we speak. The question is, will you be the face of this revelation? Will you tell your story? Through the car windows, I could see we were on a highway heading north, leaving Indiana behind. In the distance, military helicopters circled the area we'd just left, searchlights sweeping the ground. Where are we going? First, somewhere safe. Then, if you choose, to a press conference that will change American history. But understand, once you step into that spotlight, there's no going back. Blackwell was right about one thing. You'll have a target on your back forever. I thought about the documents I'd read, the experiments on innocent Americans, the decades of manipulation and control. I thought about the promise I'd made to myself in that grain silo to ensure the truth came out. I've been a target since I found that bunker. At least now I can shoot back. The driver nodded. Eleanor would have liked you. She said the truth is patient. It can wait decades, generations if necessary. But eventually it demands its moment. As we drove through the night toward an uncertain future, I realized my life as Marcus Cooper, homeless veteran, was over. Whatever came next Whether I became a hero, a martyr, or simply another casualty in America's shadow wars, at least I would face it with the truth as my weapon. Behind us, the lights of the secret facility faded into darkness. Somewhere in that complex, General Blackwell was probably being debriefed, his lifetime of secrets unraveling. Project Harbinger, hidden for 60 years, was about to be dragged into the light. And I, Marcus Cooper, who just days ago had been sleeping in a tent on an abandoned farm, was about to become the most wanted man in America. Not for what I'd done, but for what I knew. The documents were out there now, spreading like wildfire through the digital age. But documents could be dismissed, denied, explained away. My testimony, my story, my face attached to this revelation that would make it real for Americans who had lived their entire lives unaware of the experiments conducted on their communities. The driver passed back a folder. You should read this before we arrive. It's Eleanor's personal account. She knew you'd be the one to find the bunker. She chose you, Marcus. How could she choose me? She died before I even heard about the property. Read the file. Everything was orchestrated. Your winning lottery ticket, the property becoming available, even the VA system's failures that left you desperate enough to take this chance. Eleanor had help, people throughout the system who'd been waiting for this moment. As I opened the folder and began to read Eleanor May Jenkins' careful handwriting, I felt the full weight of the conspiracy I'd stumbled into. Not just Harbinger, not just government mind control experiments, but a 6-decade resistance movement that had chosen me as their weapon of revelation. The war for America's soul was about to begin, and I was both the ammunition and the soldier firing the shot. Whatever happened next, there was no going back to the simple life of Marcus Cooper, homeless veteran. I was now part of history, the secret history that was about to become terrifyingly public. Eleanor May Jenkins' letter changed everything. Written in her careful schoolteacher's script, it revealed a conspiracy of conscience that spanned decades. Her husband, Robert Jenkins, hadn't just worked on the Harbinger installation, he'd been one of its architects, recruited from MIT in 1961. But as the true nature of the project became clear, he tried to expose it. His farming accident in 1971 was no accident at all. My dear Marcus, the letter began, if you're reading this, then our plan has worked. You are not here by chance. The lottery ticket, the property sale, even your discharge from the military, all were carefully orchestrated by those of us who've waited decades for this moment. The letter detailed how Eleanor had spent 40 years building a network of sympathizers within the government, military, and intelligence communities. They called themselves the Restoration Committee, people who believed American democracy couldn't survive the shadow state that projects like Harbinger had created. They'd been waiting for the perfect candidate, someone with military credibility, no family ties that could be leveraged against them, and a genuine grievance against the system. We chose you, Marcus, because your suffering was real. Your homelessness wasn't manufactured. Though we ensured that lottery ticket found its way to you, you earned that $1,000 through years of service and sacrifice. We simply directed it toward its purpose. The driver, who identified herself only as Catherine, drove through the night while I absorbed this information. We traveled back roads, avoiding major highways and their surveillance cameras. By dawn, we reached a farmhouse in southern Illinois that served as one of the Restoration Committee's safe houses. Inside, I found something I hadn't expected. A fully equipped broadcast studio. 3 other people waited for us. A former NBC news anchor I recognized from my childhood. A constitutional lawyer who'd argued cases before the Supreme Court. And a technical specialist who'd apparently designed the system that had simultaneously released the Harbinger documents to media outlets worldwide. Sergeant Cooper, the anchor said, extending his hand. I'm David Winters. I lost my career in 1987 for asking too many questions about government surveillance programs. I've been waiting 35 years for this moment. The lawyer, Dr. Patricia Morgan, spread documents across a table. We have 6 hours before the major networks break this story. When they do, they'll need a face, a witness, someone to make it real for the American people. That's you. What about General Blackwell, the military? They'll come after me. They already are, the tech specialist James interjected. But the documents are beyond containment now. 17 major newspapers have independently verified their authenticity. 3 former Harbinger scientists have agreed to testify before Congress. The dam has broken. Dr. Morgan pulled up a document on her laptop. This is your immunity agreement. In exchange for your testimony about finding the bunker and the documents it contained, you'll receive full whistleblower protection. The Justice Department has already signed off. We have allies there too. This seems too easy, too organized. Easy? David Winters laughed bitterly. Eleanor Jenkins spent 40 years of her life preparing for this. Dozens of people risked their careers, their freedom, some their lives. Robert Jenkins was just the first casualty. We've lost 17 members over the decades. Suicides that weren't suicides, accidents that weren't accidents, heart attacks in healthy people. This victory was paid for in blood. Catherine brought me coffee and a simple breakfast. The question now is whether you're ready. In 3 hours, you'll be live on every major network. Your face will be known across the world. Your words will echo through history. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the cold nights under highway overpasses, the VA appointments that never came, the desperation that had driven me to spend my last $2 on a lottery ticket. I thought about Eleanor Jenkins, maintaining her vigil for 4 decades, and her husband, killed for trying to expose the truth. What do I need to do? The next hours were a blur of preparation. Dr. Morgan coached me on what to say, what to avoid, how to present the facts without seeming conspiratorial. David Winters worked on my appearance and delivery. James set up encrypted communications with network producers. By 9 a.m., everything was ready. The broadcast began simply. David Winters, his familiar face lending credibility to the extraordinary. Claims introduced me to America. This morning we bring you an exclusive interview with the man whose discovery has shaken the foundations of our national security establishment. Sergeant Marcus Cooper, a decorated veteran of the war in Afghanistan, accidentally uncovered evidence of a decades-long program of government experimentation on American citizens. The cameras turned to me. For a moment, I froze, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I was about to do. Then I remembered the documents, the photos of unwitting test subjects, the clinical descriptions of families torn apart by manufactured paranoia. My name is Marcus Cooper, I began. 6 days ago I was homeless, living in a tent on an abandoned farm in Indiana. Today I'm here to tell you about Project Harbinger, a classified program that has been manipulating the thoughts and behaviors of American citizens since 1961. I told my story simply, without embellishment. The condemned farm, the hidden bunker, the documents detailing experiments in Millfield and other communities across America. As I spoke, the network displayed images of the documents I'd found, expert analysis confirming their authenticity, and historical footage that corroborated the timeline. The interview lasted 2 hours. By its end, the response was explosive. Congressional leaders demanded immediate hearings. The Pentagon issued carefully worded denials that only seemed to confirm the allegations. Social media erupted with people from test communities sharing their own strange experiences, unexplained illnesses, bizarre local events, memories that suddenly made sense in light of these revelations. But the most significant response came from General Harrison Blackwell himself, Shortly after noon, he appeared at a hastily arranged press conference at the Pentagon. I watched from the safe house as he approached the podium, looking every one of his 84 years. "I have served my country for over 60 years, he began, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "Every decision I made, every action I took was in what I believed to be America's best interests. But I now see that we crossed lines that should never have been crossed. In our zeal to protect America from external threats, we became a threat to the very citizens we swore to defend." He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. "Project Harbinger was real. The documents revealed today are authentic. We did experiment on American communities without their knowledge or consent. We justified it as necessary for national security, but no goal, however noble, can justify the violation of the sacred trust between a government and its people." The press room erupted in questions, but Blackwell held up his hand. "I take full responsibility for my role in these programs. I will cooperate fully with any investigation. I only ask that the American people understand the context of the Cold War, the very real threats we faced, and the impossible choices we believed we had to make." He looked directly into the camera. "To Sergeant Cooper, whom I met under very different circumstances yesterday, I say this: you have done your country a great service. The truth, however painful, is preferable to the comfortable lie. You are the patriot here, not I." With that, he stepped away from the podium and was immediately surrounded by Pentagon security. Within hours, he was under house arrest pending a full investigation. The days that followed were a whirlwind. I testified before 3 different congressional committees. The FBI raided multiple facilities connected to Project Harbinger. Dozens of current and former intelligence officials were subpoenaed. The Restoration Committee's lawyers kept me protected and prepared throughout. Most importantly, the citizens of Millfield and other test communities finally learned the truth about what had been done to them. Town halls across the country filled with angry citizens demanding answers. Class action lawsuits were filed. Psychologists and social workers flooded into affected communities to help people process the trauma of discovering they'd been unwitting test subjects. A week after my initial broadcast, I returned to the Jenkins farmstead. The property was now a crime scene, with federal investigators carefully documenting every inch of the underground facility. Yellow tape surrounded the storm cellar entrance where I'd made my discovery. Standing there, I felt Eleanor's presence. Her peace garden, which I'd barely noticed before, was still beautiful despite winter's grip. Among the dormant plants, a simple stone marker read, "Truth is patient, it waits for its moment." Catherine appeared beside me. "Eleanor would be proud. You did exactly what she hoped you would." What happens now? To the committee, to all of you who risked everything? We continue. Harbinger was just one program. There are others still operating, still violating the public trust. But now we have precedent. We have public awareness. The shadow state thrives in darkness. You've helped bring light. And Blackwell, do you think he was sincere in his confession? Catherine considered this. "I think he's an old man facing his mortality, finally questioning whether the ends justified the means. That's the tragedy of men like him. They often don't see their moral failures until it's too late to undo the damage." A government sedan pulled up, and Dr. Patricia Morgan stepped out. "Marcus, I have news. Congress just passed emergency legislation. Full amnesty for all Harbinger whistleblowers, reparations for affected communities, and the creation of an independent oversight board for all classified domestic programs. You've changed history." I looked around the property that had been the unlikely catalyst for all of this. The VA had also been reformed in the wake of the scandal, with new funding and accountability measures. Veterans like me would get the help they needed. The farm itself had been designated a historical site. with plans to create a museum dedicated to government transparency and citizen oversight. "What will you do now?" Dr. Morgan asked. I hadn't really considered it. For months, my only focus had been day-to-day survival. Now thrust into the spotlight as a national figure, I had choices I'd never imagined. "I think I'll stay here," I said finally. "Help build that museum, make sure people don't forget what happened. Eleanor Jenkins kept watch for 40 years. Someone should continue that vigil." They nodded, understanding. As they prepared to leave, Catherine handed me a small box. "Eleanor left this for whoever found the bunker. She was quite specific. It should only be opened after the truth came out." Inside was a simple brass key and a note. "For the caretaker's cottage behind the main house site. It was never burned, just hidden by overgrowth. Make it your home. Continue the watch. E.M.J." That evening, as the sun set over the Indiana farmland, I used Eleanor's key to open a small cottage I hadn't even known existed, concealed by decades of wild grapevines and volunteer trees. Inside, it was perfectly preserved, a cozy home waiting for its next occupant. On the kitchen table was one final surprise, a photo album filled with pictures of the restoration committee over the years. Eleanor and Robert on their wedding day, committee members at secret meetings, and on the last page, a photo dated just 6 months ago, Eleanor, frail but smiling, standing in the Peace Garden with a sign that read, "Welcome home, Marcus." She had known, somehow, she had known, I would be the one. As I settled into my new home, my first real home in years, my phone rang. It was a producer from 60 Minutes wanting to do a follow-up story. Behind her, I had messages from book publishers, documentary filmmakers, and historical societies. The story of Project Harbinger and its exposure had captured the world's attention, but for now, I just wanted to sit in Eleanor's kitchen, drink coffee from her china cups, and think about the extraordinary journey that had brought me here. From homeless veteran to national whistleblower to guardian of historical truth, all because I'd spent $2 on a lottery ticket. Or was it? As I looked through more of Eleanor's papers, I found evidence that the Restoration Committee had influenced my life in subtle ways for years, guiding me toward this moment. The combat injury that ended my military career, had the mission been deliberately risky? The VA appointments that never materialized, had someone ensured I'd become desperate enough to accept any opportunity? I chose not to dig deeper. Some truths, perhaps, were better left buried. What mattered was that Project Harbinger had been exposed, that American citizens knew their government had experimented on them, and that systems were now in place to prevent such abuses in the future. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the scars where federal agents had excavated. Around the bunker. By spring, Eleanor's Peace Garden would bloom again, and visitors would come to learn about the woman who'd guarded terrible secrets for 4 decades, and the homeless veteran who'd finally brought them to light. General Blackwell served 2 years in federal prison before being released on compassionate grounds due to his age and failing health. He spent his remaining days writing a memoir titled The Darker Angels, attempting to explain how patriotic intentions had led to such profound violations of American principles. He died peacefully in his sleep, leaving his entire estate to a fund for Harbinger victims. The other conspirators faced various fates. Some, like Blackwell, confessed and cooperated. Others fought the charges and received longer sentences. A few, protected by legal technicalities or political connections, escaped justice entirely. The Restoration Committee continued its work, now operating openly as a government watchdog organization. As for me, I became the curator of the Harbinger Memorial Museum, built on the site of the Jenkins farmstead. Every day, visitors came to see the restored bunker, to read the documents that had shaken America, and to hear the story of how a desperate veteran's discovery had changed history. But my real work happened after hours, when I sat in Eleanor's cottage, monitoring government activities, watching for signs of new shadow programs, and corresponding with a network of whistleblowers and truth seekers around the world. The restoration. Gomiti had taught me that democracy requires eternal vigilance, that the price of freedom is the courage to face uncomfortable truths. Sometimes late at night I'd walk through Eleanor's peace garden, now restored and expanded. A new stone had been added beside her truth marker. It bore a simple inscription: "In memory of all those who suffered in silence, and in honor of those who found the courage to speak." The lottery ticket that had cost me $2 was framed now, hanging in the museum with a placard that read, "Sometimes the smallest actions trigger the greatest changes." Visitors often asked if I regretted buying it, if I wished I'd remained in ignorant poverty rather than bearing the weight of these terrible truths. I always gave the same answer: truth isn't comfortable, it isn't safe, but it's necessary. Eleanor Jenkins knew that. Her husband died for it. The least I can do is live for it. 3 years after my discovery, the full scope of government, mind control programs, was finally revealed through a special commission's report. Arbinger was just one of 17 similar projects dating back to World War II. The commission recommended sweeping reforms, congressional oversight, and a constitutional amendment guaranteeing cognitive liberty, the right of every American to be free from government mental manipulation. The amendment passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. It was named the Jenkins-Cooper Amendment, after the woman who'd guarded the truth and the man who'd finally revealed it. On the day it was ratified, I stood in Eleanor's peace garden, looking out over the memorial site that had once been a condemned farm. Visitors filled the grounds: veterans, historians, families from affected communities, and ordinary citizens who understood that their freedom had been both violated and ultimately protected by the courage of a few. As I watched them explore the museum, read the documents, and grapple with the complex legacy of America's shadow state, I thought about the strange path that had brought me here. From soldier to homeless veteran to whistleblower to guardian of democracy, it wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the life that chose me. Or perhaps, as Eleanor had written, the life she'd chosen for me. Either way, I'd found my purpose. In the most unlikely place, a condemned farm, hiding the condemned secrets of a nation's dark experiments. As the sun set on another day at the memorial, I returned to the cottage that had become my home. On the kitchen table lay tomorrow's schedule: a school group in the morning, a congressional delegation in the afternoon, and an evening video conference with international human rights observers studying America's response to the Harbinger revelations. But for now, I simply sat in Eleanor's chair, drank tea from her china, and reflected on the words she'd written in that first letter. The truth is patient. It can wait decades, generations if necessary, but eventually it demands its moment. You, Marcus, are that moment. Outside, the first fireflies of summer began their ancient dance over the peace garden, their light pushing back the darkness just as truth had finally pushed back the shadows of America's secret wars against its own people. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, new battles for transparency and accountability. But tonight, I was simply Marcus Cooper, caretaker of truth, sitting in a small cottage on a farm that had changed history, grateful for the strange journey that had brought me home. The morning sun cast long shadows across the memorial grounds as I prepared for what would become the most significant day since the initial revelation. 5 years had passed since I'd first descended into that hidden bunker, and the Harbinger Memorial Museum had become more than just a historical site. It had evolved into a center for government accountability and transparency advocacy. But today would shatter whatever sense of closure we'd achieved. Dr. Sarah Chen, the military historian who'd become our lead researcher, burst into my office with an expression I'd learned to recognize. She'd found something significant in the archives. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed a metal briefcase on my desk, one we'd discovered just yesterday in a concealed compartment behind the bunker's main chamber. "Marcus, you need to see this immediately," she said, her voice barely containing excitement mixed with dread. "Remember how we always wondered why Eleanor chose that specific moment for the revelation? Why wait until 2023 when she had the evidence for decades?" I set down my coffee, giving her my full attention. Sarah had spent the last 2 years meticulously cataloguing every document, every artifact from the bunker. If something had shaken her usually calm demeanor, it was serious. She opened the briefcase, revealing a collection of documents marked with classification stamps I'd never seen before. Not just top secret or eyes only, but something called Omega Clearance, Continuity Protocol. The papers were dated 2019, just months before Eleanor's death. "These aren't historical documents, Marcus. They're operational plans. Harbinger never ended. It evolved. And according to these files, something called Phase 7 was scheduled to begin in 2025. We're less than 6 months away." My blood ran cold as I scanned the first pages. The language was dense with military jargon and code names, but the core message was clear. Harbinger had transformed from a Cold War experiment into something far more ambitious. Phase 7 involved what they called total spectrum dominance, complete control over information flow, social behavior, and public consciousness using advanced AI systems, social media manipulation, and bioelectric field alterators. This is why Eleanor acted when she did, I realized aloud. She knew about Phase 7. She knew that once it launched, revelation would become impossible. The window for truth was closing. Sarah pulled out another document, this one containing technical schematics. It gets worse. They've built a network of transmission stations disguised as 5G towers, social media processing centers, even emergency broadcast systems. When Phase 7 activates, they'll have the ability to influence brain activity across entire populations, simultaneously. I stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked Eleanor's peace garden. School children were touring the grounds, learning about the importance of government oversight. How could I tell them that everything we'd accomplished, the reforms, the oversight committees, the constitutional amendment, might be meaningless in the face of this new threat? "Who else knows about this?" I asked. "No one yet. I came straight to you, but Marcus, there's something else." She handed me a photograph from the briefcase. It showed General Blackwell, not the elderly man who'd confessed 5 years ago, but a recent image. He was very much alive, despite official records stating he died in prison 3 years ago. In the photo, he stood beside a man I recognized as Thomas Ashford, the current Secretary of Defense. "He faked his death," I said, the pieces falling into place. His confession, his cooperation, it was all theater, a controlled revelation to maintain public trust while the real program continued underground. Sarah nodded grimly. "The documents suggest there are dozens like him, officials who publicly fell on their swords while secretly continuing their work. They call themselves the Continuum. They believe they're saving America from itself, protecting democracy by subverting it." I returned to the desk, my mind racing through possibilities. We had evidence of an imminent threat to American democracy, possibly to free thought itself. But who could we trust? If the Continuum had placed sleeper agents throughout the government, any revelation might be intercepted and suppressed. We need to reconvene the Restoration Committee, I decided. The old network, people we absolutely trust. And we need to do it without using any electronic communications. Sarah was already ahead of me. I've compiled a list of surviving members. Catherine, David Winters, Dr. Morgan, they're all still active. But reaching them securely will take time. We might not have. A knock at the door interrupted us. My assistant Jennifer entered, looking apologetic. Mr. Cooper, you have visitors. They say it's urgent, something about new evidence in the Jenkins case. I exchanged glances with Sarah. We'd been careful, but had we been careful enough? Send. Them in, I said, sliding the briefcase into my desk drawer. 2 men entered, one in an expensive suit, the other in military dress uniform. The suited man extended his hand with a practiced smile. Mr. Cooper, I'm Director Nathan Cross from the Office of Strategic Assessment. This is Colonel James Mitchell. We understand you've made some interesting discoveries recently. I remained seated, not taking the offered hand. I discover interesting things every day. This is a museum, after all. Cross's smile didn't waver. Of course, but some discoveries are more sensitive than others. We believe you may have inadvertently accessed materials vital to national security. We're here to help ensure they're handled appropriately. And if I haven't found any such materials? Colonel Mitchell spoke for the first time, his voice flat and threatening. Then we'll need to conduct a thorough search to confirm that, for everyone's safety. Sarah stepped forward. This is a federally protected historical site. You'll need a warrant for any search. Cross produced a document from his jacket, anticipated and prepared. Judge Harrison signed this an hour ago. National security takes precedence over historical preservation, I'm afraid. Judge Harrison, I recognize the name. He'd been appointed just 6 months ago, despite questions about his background. How deep did the continuum's influence go? I'll need to verify this with our legal team, I said, stalling for time. By all means, Cross replied. We'll wait. But I should mention, any attempt to remove or destroy materials during this delay would be considered obstruction of justice and treason. They positioned themselves by the door, making it clear we weren't leaving the room. Sarah caught my eye and subtly tapped her watch, a signal we'd established years ago. She had anticipated this possibility and taken precautions. I made a show of calling our lawyer, Dr. Patricia Morgan, knowing her phone was monitored. I gave her carefully coded phrases indicating we were compromised and needed extraction. Patricia, sharp as ever, played along perfectly. I'll be there within the hour, she said. Don't let them touch anything until I arrive. As we waited, I studied our visitors. Cross maintained his friendly facade, but Mitchell watched us with the intensity of a predator. These weren't random federal agents. They were continuum operatives, here to retrieve the Phase 7 documents and eliminate any threats to their plan. 40 minutes into our tense standoff, the fire alarm suddenly blared throughout the building. Jennifer's voice came over the intercom. This is not a drill. All personnel and visitors must evacuate immediately. Cross and Mitchell exchanged frustrated glances. They couldn't ignore a fire alarm without raising suspicions, but they also couldn't let us out of their sight. In the confusion of evacuation, Sarah and I managed to separate slightly from our minders. Outside, as fire trucks arrived, called by our allies in the local department, Catherine appeared at my elbow. The elderly woman moved with surprising agility, pressing a car key into my hand. Blue sedan, back parking lot, she whispered. David's creating a distraction at the front gate. You have maybe 3 minutes before they realize it's a false alarm. I grabbed Sarah's arm, and we moved quickly but calmly through the crowd of evacuated staff and visitors. The blue sedan was exactly where Catherine promised. As we pulled away, I saw Cross and Mitchell pushing through the crowd. their controlled demeanor finally cracking. Sarah had already pulled out a burner phone, one of several we kept for emergencies. The documents are safe. I uploaded encrypted copies to 12 different servers last night, all triggered to release if we don't input a code every 24 hours. Dead man's switch, I approved. Eleanor would be proud. We drove to a safe house the Restoration Committee maintained, a cabin in the Illinois woods where electronic signals couldn't penetrate. Other committee members were already arriving. David Winters, Dr. Morgan, Catherine, and a dozen others who'd remained in the shadows since our initial victory. As we shared what we'd discovered, the room grew increasingly somber. The Continuum wasn't just planning to restart Harbinger, they intended to perfect it. Phase 7 would make previous mind control efforts look primitive by comparison. We need to go public immediately, David argued. Full disclosure, all documents, before they can stop us. Dr. Morgan disagreed. They'll discredit us, claim the documents are forgeries, possibly even stage a terrorist attack to justify emergency powers. We need a more strategic approach. The debate continued into the night, but I found myself thinking about Eleanor's patient resistance. She'd waited decades for the right moment. Did we have that luxury now? Catherine, reading my thoughts, placed a weathered hand on my shoulder. Eleanor left one more message, she said quietly. She recorded it just before she died, to be played only if Phase 7 documents were discovered. She produced an old cassette recorder, analog, untraceable. Eleanor's voice, thin with age but still determined, filled the room. If you're hearing this, then you've discovered what I've feared for years, that our victory was just a tactical retreat by the enemy. They let us expose Harbinger because they had something worse in development, but I've prepared for this too. The recording continued, outlining a plan Eleanor had set in motion years ago. She'd identified key figures in media, technology, and international organizations who could help expose Phase 7. More importantly, she'd discovered the Continuum's critical weakness, their absolute dependence on a specific satellite network. For Phase 7's implementation, the satellites are their Achilles heel, Eleanor's voice explained. Without them, their ground systems are just expensive towers, and I've spent the last decade ensuring certain people in the aerospace industry would be ready when the time came. The recording provided names, contacts, and activation codes for a network even more extensive than the original Restoration Committee. Eleanor hadn't just prepared for revelation, she'd prepared for war. Over the next 72 hours, we executed Eleanor's plan with military precision. Tech executives who'd been secretly sympathetic to our cause began introducing bugs into critical systems. Aerospace engineers started reporting anomalies in satellite operations. International journalists received anonymous packages containing irrefutable evidence of Phase 7's existence. The Continuum fought back viciously. They arrested several committee members on fabricated charges, attempted to discredit me with a deepfake video showing me admitting to forging documents, and even staged a cyber attack they blamed on anti-government extremists. But Eleanor had anticipated their moves. For every action they took, we had a counteraction ready. When they arrested our people, lawyers with pre-filed habeas corpus petitions appeared immediately. When they released the deepfake, we flooded social media with technical analysis proving its falseness. When they staged their cyber attack, we revealed evidence of its government origins. The turning point came when SpaceX CEO Elon Musk, one of Eleanor's secret allies, announced that his company had detected unauthorized military payloads on several commercial satellites. His live-streamed press conference, showing real-time data of hidden transmitters designed for neural influence, captivated the world. Within hours, other aerospace companies confirmed similar findings. The evidence was overwhelming. The Continuum, had infiltrated civilian satellite networks to create their mind control constellation. International outrage was swift and severe. General Blackwell, forced out of hiding, appeared on every major network trying to justify Phase 7 as necessary for maintaining social order in an age of disinformation. But his arguments fell flat against the documented evidence of planned mass manipulation. President Sarah Chen, yes, our historian, had been elected in 2024, partly due to her role in exposing government overreach, addressed the nation from the Oval Office. My fellow Americans, we face a moment of reckoning. Elements within our own government have conspired to rob you of your most fundamental right, the freedom of your own thoughts. This will not stand. Effective immediately, I am ordering the shutdown of all Phase 7 operations and the arrest of anyone involved in this unconstitutional program. The aftermath was chaotic, but necessary. Hundreds of Continuum operatives were arrested. The satellite network was systematically disabled. New oversight mechanisms, far stronger than before, were implemented. The Jenkins-Cooper Amendment was strengthened to explicitly forbid any government research into mass neural influence. General Blackwell, facing life in prison with no possibility of another fake death, made one last desperate play. During his televised trial, he claimed that Phase 7 was itself a response to an even greater threat, that foreign powers had developed similar capabilities and would use them against America if we didn't act first. "You've destroyed our shield," he railed from the witness stand. "When Chinese or Russian mind control waves start influencing American elections, remember this moment. Remember that you chose naive idealism over pragmatic protection." His words might have carried weight, except that our international allies revealed they'd been conducting similar investigations. The Chinese and Russian programs he cited, they were collaborative efforts with the Continuum, a global network of power elites attempting to establish worldwide thought control. The trials lasted 2 years. The reorganization of intelligence agencies took 3. But eventually, a new equilibrium emerged, one with radical transparency requirements for any government research involving human consciousness or behavior. I remained at the museum, which expanded to include a new wing dedicated to Phase 7 and the global Continuum conspiracy. Visitors could see the actual satellite components, read the implementation plans, and learn how close humanity had come to losing its cognitive freedom. 10 years after that first discovery in the bunker, I stood once again in Eleanor's peace garden. The memorial now included a wall listing the names of all those who'd fought against mental tyranny, whistleblowers, researchers, and ordinary citizens who'd risked everything for truth. Sarah Chen, finishing her second presidential term, joined me for the dedication of the Eleanor May Jenkins Center for Cognitive Liberty, a research institution dedicated to protecting human consciousness from manipulation while advancing beneficial neurotechnology. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked, looking at the rows of names on the memorial wall. I thought about Eleanor's words, her patience, her understanding that the struggle for freedom never truly ends. Over? No. But we've bought time. We've created safeguards. Most importantly, we've made people aware. They know what to watch for now. A group of school children passed by, their teacher explaining how close America had come to thought control. One child raised her hand. "But how do we know it's not happening now? How can we be sure our thoughts are really our own?" The teacher looked to me and I knelt to the child's level. That's exactly the right question to ask. And as long as people keep asking it, keep questioning, keep demanding proof, that's how we stay free. Your skepticism is your shield. As the children moved on, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. From homeless veteran buying a lottery ticket to guardian of humanity's cognitive freedom, it seemed impossible, Yet, it had happened. All because Eleanor Jenkins had trusted that when the moment came, someone would have the courage to act. Night fell over the memorial grounds. In my cottage, Eleanor's cottage, I sat at the kitchen table where she'd planned her resistance for 4 decades. The wall now held photographs from the Phase 7 investigation, commendations from world leaders, and letters from grateful citizens whose minds remained their own. But the most precious item was still Eleanor's original note, now framed above the fireplace. Truth is patient. It waits for its moment. As I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a message from our monitoring team. Unusual energy signatures had been detected in parts of South America. A new research facility in Siberia was showing suspicious activity patterns. The eternal vigilance continued. I smiled grimly. They would keep trying. Those who sought power over human consciousness. And we would keep watching, keep exposing, keep fighting. It was the price of cognitive freedom, the burden Eleanor had passed to me, and that I would someday pass to others. The war for the human mind would never truly end, but tonight at least our thoughts remained our own. And in Eleanor's garden, the fireflies danced freely in the darkness, their natural light a reminder that some things should never be controlled, manipulated, or dimmed by those who claim to know better. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats to expose, new battles to fight. But tonight I raised a cup of tea in Eleanor's honor, the woman who'd saved democracy by planting seeds of truth and waiting patiently for them to bloom. The truth had found its moment, and we would make sure it never lost it again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.